Charles Xavier is a deadbeat and a weirdo. He raises random kids he stumbles upon to be child soldiers, but his one son with mental health issues he abandons. He's a bum. I've been seeing memes about this guy for a while now. Most of it I already knew being a casual X-Men fan. Charles Xavier manipulates people, mind wipes them, implants memories, double crosses, etc. You know the deal. However, one thing that I read a while ago during the Krakoa arc stuck out for me when someone mentioned Legion's mother, Gabrielle Haller. This video will go over how much of a horrible deadbeat Charles is, but also how insane his relationship to Gabrielle is. In the future, I have to make the trial of Charles Xavier video because man, oh man, is his list of crimes long. For now, let's begin this mini episode with Uncanny X-Men 161. Chris Claremont has created some of the greatest heroes, villains, and storylines in X-Men history that we still use today. However, a lot of his writing, like many of his time, has some strange bits in it. This issue is no exception. We're going to be skipping around a bit to avoid the greater narrative and focus more on the history here. We see Charles Xavier visiting an old friend named Daniel Shamron, who is a psychiatrist for the survivors of the Holocaust. He has requested Charles here to use his unique abilities to help with a patient. He believes it to be a trick of sorts, when in reality it's telepathy. What's crazy is that a man named Magnus is also here, which if you know X-Men, you know who this is. They exchange pleasantries. Xavier notices the Auschwitz tattoo Magneto has on him, and they both introduce him to this patient, Gabrielle Haller. This woman has been in a catatonic state because of her experiences in the Great Tragedy. While we don't know how long now, we will get some important information later. So as a last resort, they have brought Charles Xavier here to work his magic. He does his mind blast, and after breaking through this wall Gabrielle has built to protect her from the horrors of the world, then after Xavier lives her childhood, she is age 10. And while it's not explicitly stated, we can infer that this is the age in which she is put into the catatonic state, although it's hard to tell. However, she then breaks free out of the state and screams for her parents. She is finally awake. For Daniel, this is a miracle. For Charles, this is pretty routine. They put her to bed and celebrate. After we see this page of the trio hanging out, having a good time, and it's all fine and dandy. Charles and Magnus debate mutant affairs without them really knowing much about the other, and Gabrielle Haller looks at Charles Xavier like she's been stung with Cupid's arrow. Now this part is very important. Gabrielle sees Charles distracted by his thoughts of Magnus and their debates, and says she has to use her feminine charms to attract his attention. Charles then thinks, Gabby, you believe you're in love with me. This will be important later. Charles then thinks, but you aren't. Not really. Charles knows this is wrong. Gabrielle just came out of a vegetative state and she feels indebted to him. Without the information we learn later, this is still wrong. Yet Xavier goes along with it, thinking to himself, what then is the harm? We'll see Charles. Action stuff happens, it doesn't matter at this point. All we need to know is that Magneto and Xavier save the day, and Xavier gets the girl. Now we're skipping ahead a bit to Excalibur 2004, issue 14. Charles Xavier is in this cave and has this dream sequence. He sees Gabrielle Haller and embraces her, but immediately shame grips him and says, this is wrong. He confesses that he had actually manipulated her emotions to get with her, used his telepathy to make her fall in love with him. Then he does a bit of self-flagellating, but pities himself as well, saying he was lonely and in pain, and this figment of his imagination, or magic, or whatever it is incredibly considerate, almost too considerate, saying that she was in pain too, and lonely as well. I'm not sure if this is Charles thinking this, or is this Sinister doing it, but this fake Gabrielle Haller says she would have fought him off if she wanted to. Basically, a little bit of victim blaming. We learn that Charles, when he had his legs crushed, wanted to come back to her but never did, and Gabrielle, after falling for one psychiatrist, falls for the other, Daniel Shamron. Somebody please investigate this place, take their medical license away. This is a horrific malpractice. Gabrielle then has a son, not Daniel's, but Xavier's. Gabrielle says sorry for not telling you, but let's be real, Xavier is the world's greatest telepath. The literal mutant finding device Cerebro was created in 1964. He had all the time in the world to find his son after forming the X-Men, but he never did. Now the rest of this issue is Charles coming to terms with what he did and forgiving himself, but fuck that, man. This dude deserves prison time for taking advantage of what basically is a 10-year-old girl in a woman's body. No matter how you slice it, what he did was horribly wrong. Xavier is barely a step above the Purple Man, if you guys know who that is. Just disgusting work. Now before we get into the next comic, there are a few things I have to mention here. I'm having a hard time finding the issue because it's from the Krakoa era, where there are lots of these white pages full of text, sometimes unimportant information, and sometimes very important. I'm not sure if it's mentioned in one of these pages, but for my research, people are pretty certain it's implied that Xavier not only manipulated Gabrielle to fall in love with him, but also did so to sire reality warping air, basically using her the same way Mr. Sinister used Madeline Pryor as a broodmare to simply create a powerful mutant baby. I don't know if that's true or not, mainly because so many writers worked on this and things kind of got jumbled up. However, what is certain is that Xavier did not raise Legion. Now, Gabrielle says it's because he was disabled, but I don't buy it. You couldn't have moved your son into your mansion. There are a lot of arcs with Legion, and I might do a video on him later, but Xavier has treated him horribly his entire life. This next bit will really seal the deal. Legion of X, a very interesting comic that deals with the mindscape, reality powers, and mutant therapy and justice. Legion creates a world in which mutants have this altar to avoid real-world conflict. That's as much backstory as you need, but it's important to realize that this actually works. It is a good thing fundamentally. How does Charles Xavier react to his estranged son, Legion, who is set out to do good in the world? Let's see. We see how Ruth, who is Legion's partner, contacts Xavier through a dream, begging him to visit David because his unresolved daddy issues are becoming a huge problem. Xavier says, "Fuck that. I am the ruler of Krakoa, not a present father. What are you, crazy? Plus, that wackadoo has lost control too many damn..." And Ruth cuts him off because he is disrespecting her boy. We see how much self-control Legion has, how his powers constantly push him into chaos and slipping into this weird transcendence, how David wants to hold Xavier and murder him, cry and tell secrets, how he wants to show Xavier how wrong he is for abandoning him, for betraying him, for thinking so little of him, but he does not. Ruth says, "Do not speak to me of control. Real shit. My girl Ruth is a real one. I love her so much." We see Xavier peddle the same lie in response that he wasn't aware of David his entire life. Ruth is like, tell him that if you really believe it. Tell him how the world's greatest telepath was unaware of his own inconvenient legacy. Xavier just mumbles, "I don't know how to help something you don't understand." Ruth claps back, "He doesn't need your help, you lonely old monster. He needs your love." Xavier wakes up, and with this heart-to-heart, you'd think he'd finally become a halfway decent dad, try to actually apologize, atone for his sins. But what's the first thing this motherfucker does? He says, "Computer, open file, contingency operations, codename Daedalus." Dude is pulling a Tower of Babel on his own fucking son. Jesus Christ, man. In issue 9, Xavier finally pays David a visit, saying, "I come in peace." David is super confused, and Charles just says, can't a father visit his son without an ulterior motive? And we see his hand placed upon David's shoulder, and a little sound effect of zzz goes off. What could that be? Then we get this heartwarming and heartbreaking page of David showing Xavier all his hard work, how he brings joy, heals souls, soothes loneliness for all the mutants. At the end, Xavier covers his face in shame. David is super confused, and instead of doing literally anything to undo the damage, he just plays it off. And then Xavier admits to David that he thought he was going to fight him, that he had all this built up resentment, and that he would unleash his powers in this convoluted trap. After Xavier recognizes all the good he's done, his generosity and self-control, he finally says, "I'm proud of you, David, and I'm so sorry." David is like, "What? Why do your thoughts feel so guilty? My mind hurts. What have you done?" Fuck me, man, this is heartbreaking. Xavier, instead of reckoning with his past, accepting the consequences of his actions, and facing his problems head-on, does what he always does, takes the underhanded approach. Xavier will always secure his win in the slimiest ways imaginable. Look at how badly Legion ages here. What's even crazier is that upon seeing his own son in this state, disheveled, weakened, and in the shell of his former self, he does not give a single fuck. Ruth is like, "What did you do to him?" And Xavier is like, "Who cares? What is that thing?" Which is some sci-fi magic threat. Read the comic if you're interested. Xavier continues saying, "What is this thing doing to my people?" Again, Xavier is and always will be this pompous ass who's too focused on being this mutant leader instead of being a present father. Now, I'll give what little credit I can, because after Xavier abandons his son again, after psychically poisoning him, because in his words, "My people have to come first," he does come back to help David. Ruth and Xavier do their psychic bullshit, and Xavier sees what Ruth was talking about earlier, how insanely strong David's self-control is. David just wakes up and mutters, "I rule me." Fuck me, man, I have to do that Legion video soon. He is such a cool character when it comes to mental health and self-destruction. However, this video is about Xavier, the eternal bum. I need you guys to understand, this guy, Charles Xavier, is so much worse than you can imagine. Part of that is the comic writers who constantly try to demonize Xavier and create tension for dramatic storylines, but some of it has been baked into the character since the Stan Lee days. If this video made you think less of Charles, understand this is a drop in the bucket of Xavier's crimes. I understand that this is a much shorter video, but I didn't have enough time to do more, unfortunately, so this was done in a crunch. Another big shout out to my members listed here. Huge shout out to the OG 7s, Cable and Joey. That Red Hood vs Joker fight actually turned out to be pretty good, so expect me to reminisce on my boy Jason's history as Robin in the members only video next month. That's it for today, guys. Alrighty, y'all. Peace.